Welcome back to Patriot to the Core podcast. I, of course, am Thad Forrester, and I sincerely thank you for listening again this week. I am excited to welcome our guest today, George. He's a 17-year member of the Air Force. He's a TACP, which stands for Tactical Air Control Party member. So if you're not familiar, just look them up. They're part of Air Force Special Operations. He was also a teammate of my brother Mark's, and so we talk about his life, why he joined the Air Force, and his love of country and the service that started while he was in high school, and then talk about his several deployments. He went to Fallujah when there's just a lot of crap going on there, a lot of violence. He's been deployed multiple times. I think I know when he was actually with my brother Mark when he was killed, and that was George's 9th deployment. So he's been around the block a time or two. He's actually, with his new role now, he deploys occasionally as well. So just a great selfless American. He is a friend of our families. We've had him in our home. He's been banged up, beat up pretty good from his career, and it's just amazing to see where he's at now. So he's very inspiring, and he suffered from a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt back in 2010 and 11 and maybe beyond, but we talk a little bit about that, and we're probably going to have him back for a part 2 to talk about more about his recovery while at Walter Reed and thereafter. So it is a pleasure to have George with us. Welcome to the show, George. Thanks for being on Patriot to the Core.
Thanks for having me, Thad. It's good to talk to you, and I'm kind of excited. This is my first podcast, so.
Well, I've heard you talk about, maybe how your love of country and as a youngster and how much you wanted to serve in some way. So that's how I'd like to start out is really how you gained your love of country.
Okay, yeah. So I guess so. My name's George. I've been in the Air Force for going on 17 years now, and I think I'm unique in a way that I decided to probably go down that path when I was 16 years old, and subsequently enlisted in the Air Force upon graduating high school, and I haven't regretted a moment of it. It's been an incredible journey, and I think that kind of what made me look towards pursuing a career and a life in the military was maybe some of the way I was brought up. I'm a son of a police officer from the Dearborn, Detroit area. I was surrounded with my dad and his friends and uncles that were firemen, and all had military backgrounds, and service was just kind of service to community and pride in country was just something that was kind of I was surrounded by as a kid, and I couldn't really, and I just grew to appreciate those things. Going into high school, the high school I went to in Livonia, Michigan, offered an ROTC program for high school kids called JROTC, and I thought it was pretty neat, and I always thought the military was interesting, and I signed up for it my freshman year. And the unique thing about it was that it wasn't what I thought. Initially, I thought it was just going to be people trying to recruit you for the military, and that really wasn't it at all. In fact, the colonel and the senior master sergeant, it was the Air Force ROTC outfit, they'd probably give you a million reasons why you shouldn't join the military, and why you should go to college or a trade school instead. They weren't there to recruit kids for the military. They were there to teach kids about leadership and teamwork and kind of like what responsibility was, which when you're 14, you don't really understand what those things are necessarily. Mm-hmm. So some of the things that I did in ROTC was a lot of community service. One of our big missions was to spend a lot of time Sundays and holidays at the Veterans Hospital in downtown Detroit. And no matter what, we always had a face from our ROTC squadron down there every Sunday and at every major holiday. Because there's a lot of old vets there that are kind of just there by themselves. They don't have family or what have you. It's really easy. You go to their room, you get them in their wheelchair, you take them to church and donuts, but you're 14 years old and you're hanging out with people from the greatest generation, and and they're sharing their stories with you and their life with you, and you're getting a lesson in history that you might have only touched on briefly, in a semester of high school history class.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're really impressionable when you're young, and those were pretty powerful moments. And, seeing my dad as a policeman, I saw him in his uniform almost every day. I took pride in that, and I wanted to be somebody that gave back to his community. And I guess I'm kind of the individual that really cares about the folks that I work with and family. And I thought service might have been a good way to start my life out after high school. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a career. My initial plan was probably to maybe do a couple of years, do an enlistment, and then maybe try and be a policeman like my dad back home. But I ended up kind of falling in love with my work, and I think the best thing about it is I feel like I work with the best people on the planet. And now that my career's coming to an end here in the next couple of years, that's the one thing that I know that I will probably miss the most is the people that I serve with. And from buddies that have retired before me, that's probably the one thing that they miss the most as well. And, and I've kind of had that camaraderie with folks since I was 14, and I feel pretty fortunate about that. And that's basically ROTC, and the fact that I grew up as a cop's kid kind of drew me towards the service.
So how did your classmates receive you being either in JROTC or wearing a uniform to school?
So, I mean, kids are kids. This is in 1996 when I was a freshman, so there was no war on terrorism. Things, I guess, from a kid's perspective in high school were relatively calm. It definitely wasn't the cool move. It wasn't. Yeah. It didn't make give me votes to be the prom king or anything along those lines. But I really didn't care. Your first semester there, you do have to wear your uniform once a week. It's part of the course, because you got to learn discipline and you got to learn how things supposed to be put together. And you want to wear it with pride because it's more than, it's not just your uniform, it's what it represents. And even though you're only 14, the ROTC uniform, they're wearing the same service dress uniform that anyone on active duty would wear. It's just got little, different insignias on it. So you don't want to disrespect that. And to me, I just thought that was more important than, I did get made fun of from time to time. It didn't matter. I ended up staying in ROTC for my entire 4 years of high school, and I really enjoyed it. And I think I had a different high school experience than other kids, I did, I was in sports and I had good groups of friends, but our ROTC unit had a flight of kids that were special needs kids, and it wasn't necessary, but, if given the opportunity, you could take a semester and you could be the flight leader for that flight. And you had to teach these kids how to march, how to wear their uniform, help them with their schoolwork after school. And, I guess it's community service, but, I mean, it kind of changes your perspective on how you deal with people, and it instills a kind of a level of compassion, I think, that a lot of people don't get when they're young adults, know, especially at that stage in life in high school. And at this, you do something like that, and it kind of changes you a little bit. And I did that when I was 16 years old. I spent 4 months with my classmates. They were just special needs. They weren't any different. They were good people. They needed a little extra help. And it was my job for a few months to make sure that they were taken care of. And, ever since then, I've always kind of had this, I like taking care of my buddies. And I think that's probably the root of where that comes from.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that age don't have many experiences where they're able to serve on a regular basis.
They don't. I think, and there's opportunities out there. There's ROTC and different high schools. There's the Scouts. There's volunteer opportunities. I don't think it's one of those things that maybe parents or I see it a lot in your community, in the Mormon community, and it's not necessarily a chore, but it's something like it seems like y'all teach people the value of it, of giving back a little bit. And
Yeah, that's for sure.
I think the world could be a little bit better place if there was a little bit more of that going around.
Yeah.
So
how did you get in? You joined Special Operations and in the Air Force. So how did you get into that? And what what do you do? What's your job?
So I'm an Air Force Tactical Air Control Party member, TACP for short. And that job there is essentially being aligned with Army ground units and coordinating and controlling firepower and most importantly, air power. You're like the air liaison. I didn't get into special operations until I was about 7 years into my career because traditionally that job in the Air Force is aligned with your conventional Army units, the infantry divisions, the armor divisions, the airborne division, etc. And a small percentage of the career field does work with special operations. And it's just a lot of that really comes down to luck. Like if positions are open, and I was fortunate enough to where positions were becoming open, and a selection came up. I was able to go to the selection and the recruiting event, and it just worked out to where I was finishing up my time at an assignment in Hawaii. And then I ended up at Fort Bragg back in 2008, and I've been doing special operations since then, full time. And prior to that, I had augmented. I've been augmenting over in Afghanistan since 2007.
For a TACP, do you go through the same pipeline that controllers do?
No, we don't. It is different because we get aligned right off of graduation from technical school to conventional Army forces. So you don't need all of those schools or necessarily all that training. When guys are recruited and go through their assessments to go into Air Force Special Operations, then there's another pipeline they'll go through the training in Florida that your brother went through for a few months to catch up with their counterparts they'd be working with, the combat controllers and some of the tactical skills. But we kind of hire guys that are a little bit more senior and typically have some experience. So and then some of the schools like Free Fall School, if a TACP doesn't already have it, they usually get those later on, based off of the mission and if they need them to have it or not.
Okay. I keep thinking about just, still going through the training, and I'm sure it's difficult and, not just anybody can do it. I mean, how did you get through the training to become a TACP?
Just kind of being stubborn, young, and being young helps because I don't think I'd have as much fun now at 35 and with all these miles on me. But just being young and super motivated and just really excited to just be part of the military. Like, you don't really realize that going and hiking 20 miles isn't necessarily bad for you because you got a rucksack on and you're running around the woods at night. So in a way, you think it's kind of cool. But and you just you have good buddies along the way, just like buddies of mine that are controllers and pararescue men. They all have very good friends from their respective pipelines that you make those friendships and those buddies help kind of keep you motivated. And then usually everyone that kind of gets to the level where I'm at, where we're working, they've got this internal drive that is it's pretty incredible. Like they're the kind of folks that if they can't do something, they're going to learn how to do it, and then they're going to learn how to do it and try and be the best at it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, that's definitely common.
And that's the one thing I love the best is just surrounding myself with people like that. So it's almost impossible to get complacent because if you do, you might lose your job.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about some of those miles on your aging body. I know. You've deployed multiple times, and I know that you were in Fallujah when it was just very active there. So, I mean, what was that like? And what year was that? I can't remember. Was it 2004?
That was in 2004.
Okay.
That was kind of when the insurgency in Iraq was getting pretty large, and Fallujah was turning into a big problem area. I can't remember all this. I was still pretty young then too. I was only in my early 20s. But I wasn't in the middle of Fallujah. I wasn't part of the main effort per se. I was more on the cordon element, but the city itself isn't very large, and the amount of firepower, just U.S. firepower, U.S. forces on the ground committed to that fight, it almost looked like something out of a modern warfare video game commercial that you'd probably see today.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nasty fight. It was definitely a necessary fight. And then and it was pretty. But I was also, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, to be honest with you. Chaos, controlled chaos. Every unit that had a piece of that pie, they had their lanes. The amount of aircraft over a tight airspace overhead was just incredible. I think it's pretty incredible. And it's funny because the guys managing all that chaos, that airspace control, fortunately I wasn't one of them. But it was just weird. It was like you had your small sector of town. I was more on the cordon element, and you just kept pushing through to each phase line, and then to pretty much secured the city. The Marines were the heaviest fighting element in there, for sure. But yeah, man, it was just kind of like controlled chaos.
So Fallujah, I'm guessing it's a pretty big city, and you had the insurgents just spread all throughout amongst also non-enemies. Is that
well? It's kind of like I said. It's kind of like I said. I wasn't in the heart of it, but it's like what you see maybe today with ISIS and Raqqa, like on we see in the news. There wasn't and like I said, I can't remember the political or the reasons why there wasn't a big military footprint in Fallujah per se. They were more on the outskirts of Fallujah, and it kind of allowed Al Qaeda and other groups that were aligned with them to pretty much just dig in. So when the guys did take Fallujah, they had to clear it house to house. They literally had to clear every section of the city. But when they did come in contact with the enemy, they were coming in contact with a pretty heavily entrenched, well-defended enemy. So it was a very technical fight, for the infantrymen, for special ops guys on the ground, for everybody involved. And then you still had civilians kind of in the mix as well, because not everyone could have gotten out of town, even though, they'd made attempts to let people know, hey, get out of town. Mm-hmm. You still have civilians in that mix as well, which further complicates things. So, and that was kind of in the beginning of the real, when the insurgency was really starting to go full bore, like in Iraq. And to be honest with you, like it was still kind of like the very beginning of the U.S. U.S. military as a whole becoming like a counterinsurgency force. So there's a lot of like lessons learned, and there's a lot of, it was definitely a tough fight. You're fighting a bunch of trenched-in insurgents with a huge ground force and armored vehicles and a bunch of air support, and you're trying not to hurt, civilians. So.
Yeah, I mean, we lost a lot of guys in Iraq.
Yes, we did. And I think the Marines took the heaviest toll there in Fallujah. They were the main effort. Yeah, man, it was. I got zapped at a few times while I was there, but I was more on a cordon element, and just kind of, I was really more of a spectator, I think, but I wasn't quite as in the weeds as some of the other guys. But it was definitely an eye-opening experience. I've never experienced anything like it in the rest of my years in the military, fighting-wise, probably until 2010 in my time with Mark in that Choo-Choo Valley.
Yeah, so 6 years later from Fallujah, you're in Aruzgan and at Fob Cobra, and I may be skipping something that you want to talk about, George. If so, then talk about it. But if not, yeah, what was it like in Aruzgan, and maybe we can get to how you knew Mark and what it was like those last few days.
So before Afghanistan, so that trip to Afghanistan where I had worked with Mark. That was at that time my 9th deployment. That was going to be my 9th deployment. So I'd been around quite a bit. My first deployment was the invasion into Iraq, and then that was going to be my 9th one in 2010. But prior to that, I had known Mark briefly at the 21st STS Squadron. As I was one of my main roles there was training new guys coming in from the pipeline, like your brother at the time, to be JTACs, Joint Terminal Air Attack Controllers, to then go out into the field. So I spent a little bit of time essentially getting your brother trained up and certified to do that mission, which he was going to then end up doing on his first deployment, which was to Aruzgan. And Mark he was kind of in a weird spot. So we try and deploy as a unit, but sometimes they need bodies. So Mark was kind of filling a spot. So he was in between squadrons. I don't know if you remember that or not. So Mark was there for 3 months before I got there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mark was there, and I mean, Aruzgan's a very difficult place to fight. It's a very difficult place to operate. There's a lot of very interesting dynamics there, not just with the Taliban and Al Qaeda and other extremist groups, but also, just the tribal dynamics. And, when you're working there, you need to navigate the human terrain just as much as, accommodate and, fix and finish the enemy, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So they typically wouldn't send guys that were as young as Mark out that way, but I think hurting for numbers, and the thing is, Mark was just really good at his craft, and I'm not saying that to be nice, and I don't say that sparingly. He was beyond exceptional. I think a lot of that has to do with he wasn't the 19-year-old kid who enlisted out of high school like me. He had school. He had done a mission, correct?
Yeah.
And he had some life experience before coming in. So he wasn't, when we'd go to Las Vegas to do training, he wasn't so much enamored with the fact that he's in Las Vegas, like maybe a young 20-year-old who's his first time away from home. He's more interested in doing his homework and getting ready to plan for his training. He just wanted to train, get certified, make sure he was good at his craft, and then get out the door and then take the fight to the enemy. And me and the other guys in the training section who we noticed that, and when leadership was asking, hey, I don't have any say on where we go and we get assigned to locations, but hey, out of all these guys going on their first deployment, if we had to put a newer face with a more complicated area, whether it's because of the enemy or politics or whatever, who's the best guy, who's the most mature. And Mark was, unanimously at that group of guys at the top of his list. And then they needed a body at Cobra, which is a very difficult place, and everyone felt confident, myself included, that Mark would do well there. Plus, he was also going to be working with another experienced controller, so he wouldn't be necessarily left there, to make all these decisions on his own. But, you've heard all the stories, and prior to me deploying, reading all the situation reports and all that, I found out I was going to be going to that fire base, and I'll be working with Mark for his last 3 months there, the first 3 months of my deployment. And, he was just exceptional. He didn't do anything wrong. He got to the point where he was a fire and forget weapon system. The teams on the ground trusted him. His teammate trusted him. And I, having seen him in training, I had all the confidence in the world to work with him. And you're pretty switched on to that fire base. It's a nasty area in Afghanistan. Aruzgan used to be, from what I was told, kind of like a vacation area before the U.S. invasion for like high-ranking Taliban members. There's family ties there with them, and that fire base historically is just they're always getting in very, very nasty gun battles with the Taliban, and sometimes very close to home. Very close to home where you're camped out at. So I found out I was going there. I was pretty excited because I was going to get to go execute my craft. I knew I was going to be working with a really scored away airman, your brother. and I had a feeling it was going to be a pretty worthwhile trip.
So what was it like? What was maybe go ahead, George. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. Ask your questions.
What was it like there? I mean, we know everyone listening to this knows Mark was killed on 29 September 2010, but what was that last mission like? Because y'all were together.
Yep. So me and Mark had been together a couple of times, man. Even like that deployment ended pretty short for me. I got there in early August, and as you know, I was medevaced out of there in early October, just a few days after Mark had been killed. And me and Mark had been on a couple of good missions together. Sometimes my team and me would sit quick reaction force for Mark's team while they were out, and vice versa. And sometimes we'd have to go out together. So going into that last mission was actually quite a large mission. You covered it a little bit in your book to clear out that valley, and that went all the way from Tarrant Cout all the way up to where our fire base was, and it was big. I mean, there was a lot of people involved. We were kind of like the northern element of it, and essentially what kind of happened was, as everyone started going into this huge valley to clear out the Taliban, they all kind of just started heading north, and they kind of ran into us. And it was a couple of days of just really nasty fighting. So the first day, which is the 28th, and September 28th, and I think you've got one too. I got that photo taken of me and Mark prior to kicking off.
Oh yeah, early in the morning.
Yep, early in the morning. It's a picture of us. We knew it was going to be nasty. We knew we were going to be. We wanted kind of because Mark was kind of a joker, man, and people that know me know I am too, and you kind of you're afraid because you know what's coming, but you're also, you trust your training, you trust your teammates, and we're like, all right, let's get this before picture, and we're going to do an after picture. Because we were expecting probably to be in this valley for like 3 to 5 days. And so we're like, yeah, that'd be kind of funny, right? We'll do it before, and we're expecting, some crazy after picture where we're just covered in mud and just looking crushed. And I'm actually grateful that I took that picture because it kind of helps me get through my worst days. So the first day of that fight, we dropped some dismounts off, and I was with the dismounted element, and basically we needed to get a purchase into the valley to allow the armored Humvees, make sure that they could get a secure entrance in, and then we were going to have kind of like an L shape going through the valley with one leg of the L, all armored Humvees, and the other leg of the L, dismounts, clearing through the thick vegetation in the villages and the houses. So on the first day, I was in the, and this is kind of the neat thing about working with Mark. So I was in the vegetation with the dismounts, and we were working on getting the purchase for the vehicles in. And I mean, we weren't in there very long, and then it just blew up. But being in the woods, or down in we call it the green zone, you couldn't really see where the enemy fire was coming from. You could tell it was close. You could tell they didn't quite know where you were, so you couldn't really engage them. And then when we finally got to a point where we could make out at least where we knew they were, we just couldn't see them pinpointedly. Then I was able to kind of coordinate with Mark, and he was on the high ground with the trucks and one of the team sergeants in the mortar. And Mark was helping guide the mortar rounds onto those guys, which is kind of cool because typically you don't really always have an extra special tactics buddy with you. Usually it's you doing that on your own. Where now I'm kind of like helping Mark. He has a better vantage point. I could pop some smoke. He can see. I'll let him know where we're at and let him know where the enemy's at, and then I could trust him to drop mortars down. And that was the first time Mark dropped fires close to my position on that fight, and there'd be another time a little bit later in the day. but he never skipped a beat. I always knew he had my back, and he was always on the radio. Once we kind of like pushed through that first phase line, and then we could take a knee and let the trucks get in. We had our whole kind of formation set up to start our clearance, and it was kind of just a knockout, drag out fight. Every 100 meters, you had to fight for every 100 meters.
So you were firing your weapons a lot as well as air
absolutely.
power? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely were. And the neat thing was the way we did our mission planning with me and Mark is we knew there was going to be some serious limitations. And when you're a JTAC, the most important thing is to really know where your friendlies are at. And in combat, and that's one of those things that, Mark was very good at. He showed that in his training. He executed it flawlessly over the course of his deployment. Combat gets crazy. And it's very hard to keep track of where all the good guys are at. And when you're getting ready to drop bombs, oftentimes danger close, like the last thing you want to do is incapacitate or kill friendlies with friendly bombs, So the way we had it set up was where one of us would be in the trucks along that axis of the L, and then one of us would be at the far end of the dismount so that we could have kind of along that river. I think you've seen the map. Mm-hmm. As we're clearing this valley north to south. So Mark's on the west side, and I'm way on the east side near the river as we're making our way down. Between the two of us, even though we couldn't see everybody, I could see the guys he couldn't see, and he could see the guys I couldn't see. So it was kind of interesting. So between the two of us, like, we didn't have to bother the commander a whole lot. We knew where everyone was at. So when either myself or Mark had a weapon solution, whether it was a mortar system or attack helicopters or A-10s, like they knew we knew what we were talking about, and we didn't have to waste a lot of their time. We could say, hey, here's the solution to fix this problem. I just need your initials, and we'll rock and roll. So as that day dragged on, we kind of had a little bit of a wane in the fighting. And I remember being in a compound, and it was kind of quiet as me and Mark were kind of going back and forth. We were both on our AirNet talking with one of the A-10 pilots about Alabama football, and he ended. I'm from Michigan, so I was talking about Michigan football, and he was from, I can't remember what state. We were all from different states. We're all on the radio. You develop these funny relationships with pilots when you're a JTAC. And Mark, he's insane about Alabama football, so he just wasn't letting anyone get a word in. And the next thing I know, just all hell broke loose again. And the walls on the compound that I was hunkered down in just started getting chewed up by all kinds of enemy fire, RPGs. And I remember getting a peek over the wall to try and see where it's coming from. Mark was a little bit behind me in the truck, but he could see my compound because he was on an elevated position. And I couldn't see where the bad guys were shooting from. They were very close, though, and he could see a lot of their movement, the way the trees were. And he ended up calling in a danger close gun run to my position. So that was pretty interesting. That was definitely a first for me to have, as the senior JTAC, to have someone call it a danger close gun run on my position. Because the bad guys were only maybe like 30 meters away. I couldn't see him to really get a good talk on. The aircraft couldn't see him, but Mark was able to do it. I threw some smoke out there for him, and he was able to get a talk on off the smoke because, once again, he knew where I was at and he could see us. I gave him the final heads up on where all of us were on the front, and then he worked the strike.
Was this with the Apaches?
No, that came later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this was with A-10.
A-10,
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the Apaches weren't far behind. That was a little bit later in the day. That was towards the end of the day.
Okay.
Similar situation. I couldn't see them. Mark couldn't see us. He could see the target. He couldn't see us. I knew where we were, but I couldn't see the target. So we each had a very vital piece of the equation for close air support to happen. But we worked really well together. Even though it was something we never really rehearsed, it ended up being something that after that deployment, when I got out of the hospital and got back into training guys, that we kind of started instituting, because sometimes guys work with another combat controller or a TACP, so training guys on how to communicate and not try and fight over who gets to say cleared hot, but just make sure the information is very fluid. It was something me and Mark had never rehearsed, never even thought of it, to be honest with you. And when it came go time, it just happened very smoothly. And I think it was just me and him worked really well together. We really did.
Well, and I know that next day you got injured or you got a concussion.
Yeah. So the next day we were able to in that area they typically didn't like to fight at night. And we've been scrapping all day, so we had quite a bit of assets overhead. Me and Mark took turns, using an AC-130 for security. But we're talking about the next day, and we're deciding now, now that we've got the trucks and we can maneuver it's opening up a little more. We're gonna maneuver further ahead with the trucks, and then try and use the trucks to draw fire, and then fix and shoot, engage the enemy with the trucks, since they're armored, they have more weapons, and then give the guys on the ground, the dismounted troops, some time to move up. So me and Mark had decided that we're kind of going back and forth about it, and we decided that I was gonna be the guy in the vehicle. And the reason why I wanted to push for that is I was the senior guy out of the two of us, and I knew that the trucks were going to get chewed up. And it wasn't that I didn't think Mark would be able to do his job well. I just felt like I wasn't about to put an E4 in a position that I wasn't going to go into, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was the E6. He's my E4 teammate. I'm not going to put him in a worse situation than me. I felt like that was the wrong call. And for the most part, I was correct. So this is going into the day of the 29th. We kind of get our morning started, kind of slow, and then once we push the trucks towards the next phase line, that's when it really heats up again. And the assessment was correct. We just started getting smashed. Mortar rounds falling on top of our heads, and a lot of heavy machine gun fire. And we're able to suppress and engage them and work some strikes from the trucks to allow the dismounts to then move up. So Mark's element, they were able to move up. The enemy is kind of consumed with us in the vehicles, keeping their head down. They let us know when they get to their limit of advance, we'll shift fire, and they would kind of clean up the enemy. So this is where you're getting at with the helos. The next day, Mark's in the woods. We get to that first phase line. Those guys move up to start shooting at the enemy. They get a little bit pinned down. Mark, he can't see the enemy. I can see where the enemy's at, but I can't see where Mark and the friendlies are at. So we're just kind of in reversed roles as we were the day prior. And we're able to work. I was able to work the Apache fires that way. And we kind of had a good thing going, but the trucks were definitely getting chewed up. One guy who passed away later in the rotation, Tony, he was already shot in the leg at that point. And we pushed a little bit further towards the next phase line, and then we found kind of their little hornet's nest, and where they were really dug in. So as the trucks are scrapping, trying to open up some breathing room for the guys on dismount, that's when I ended up getting injured. I had a 82 millimeter. I was in a 50 caliber turret on the truck and had an 82 millimeter mortar land on a wall towards my side. Fortunately, the chicken plate, which is just a piece of armor in front of the 50 cal that I was using, took most of the shrapnel. I ended up getting knocked unconscious, waking up inside the truck with some shrapnel in my arm, in my hands, and just kind of confused as what was going on. And it's kind of a weird thing being dazed like that. I actually remember in my right ear, we're as a JTAC, I have two radios. I have one to talk to the team and another radio to talk to the airplanes. So me and Mark and all the aircraft are on one radio net. And in my right ear, I just hear Mark calling my call sign. because he saw the whole thing, and he's just like, he thought my truck blew up, and yeah, I just remember hearing like, "Hey, this is Jag 28, George. You all right, buddy? You all right?" And then he stopped using call signs and, "Hey, George, it's Mark. Are you up?" And I kind of like woke up like, "What's going on?" And then one of the team guys like, "Dude, get back up there," like calling some air support. And Mark, I got back up on the net, told Mark I was all right, and he helped me fix where the bad guys were at, and I worked another airstrike. So I definitely put myself in the position to take the most beating, but as we continue to move forward, and Mark was continuing to clear buildings, there's that it's war, and one of the medics is Mark and a medic, and I believe the team sergeant were clearing a building. The medic was killed. I think he was correct me if I'm wrong, Thad, you know the story as well, but he was the last guy going into the building after Mark.
It's hard to say. I mean, he was outside. I don't know. I can't figure that out, George.
Yeah, I can't either. But one of the teammates was shot and killed. And what we know is that Mark was laying down suppressive fire to find the shooter, and during an attempt to recover teammate, because Mark didn't know. I mean, he just knew a guy was down. He didn't know he was dead. That's when Mark was shot, recovering Calvin. What we know about the bullet is that it hit the side of his plate and split in half, and I believe the other half went into his heart. So when that fighting broke out, I was a little bit further down the road, and I heard Mark talking to the helos. He was working the helos on his problem, and trying to work through it. But I could tell that he was in a bind, because it was probably the only time I heard some concern, or I don't want to say panic, but like it was very rare to hear Mark sound stressed out on the radio.
Uh-huh.
You could tell by the tone in his voice that he was in a jam. I remember like, "Hey man, we got to talk to those guys." Comms weren't that. We started having comm issues with those guys on the ground. Like, "Hey man, we got to try and get these trucks back there. We're a little bit ahead." Mark's having issues. He's trying to talk the helicopters onto someone shooting at him, saying that he's pretty much pinned down. And once that call went out, they had gotten a bit spread out on the ground, so other team guys that were dismounted were trying to make their way to his position, like Ryan. I know you met Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to him. So I don't. All I know is, and then I heard the birds. At that point, I put the rest of the cast stack over to Mark on his net, or on the net. I was like, "Hey, you guys gonna take all?" Gave them the area they were at, had the helos, talked the fixed wing on too to get more eyes in the sky to help Mark out, and then Mark started talking to him a little bit, and then all of a sudden I stopped hearing Mark on the radio, and I kept hearing the pilots calling his call sign over and over again, and I knew at that point something had happened.
George, one thing I've wanted to ask is, when you're hearing all this on the radio, is there a lot of gunfire? Is it Mark's gunfire? Can you hear the enemy shooting? I mean,
there was a lot of sporadic gunfire. Even while it was happening, I had an RPG zip over my head. It was still a very chaotic environment. I think what had happened was, in my honest opinion, I think I don't think it was necessarily a large force that they had encountered. I think it was a relatively small force that was able to stay hidden and just kind of wait to attack. But there was gunfire. It was hard I couldn't tell you who was shooting what necessarily. I could tell you the things that I was shooting at. I was actively engaged in close targets. Everyone was shooting at everything. There was a lot of bad guys in that valley. So once I told the guys in the trucks, I was like, "Hey man, Mark's off the radio. I think he's hurt. Something's wrong." their guys weren't answering the radio either. Calvin wasn't answering the radio. So then we tried to reconsolidate forces and push as much as we could to their position. And then that's when, not long after that is when one of the guys, I can't remember who, might have been Ryan, came up on the radio and told us that we had the 2 Eagles down, Mark and Calvin. So,
what was your reaction?
It's kind of hard to say. Your adrenaline is so amped. You were just in the fight. I remember just feeling completely heartbroken and helpless, which is a feeling I'm not accustomed to feeling. And I didn't know who you were, but I could only think about what I'm going to say to his family.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys was, I think I was kind of shell shocked from it. Plus, I had some injuries and a concussion. So one of the guys saw I was just like staring off into space, if you will. Kind of slapped me and said, "Hey, dude, you got to snap out of it." I was like, "All right." I'm back in the fight. Started to work our helo to get our 2 heroes out of there, which we couldn't do until we had a relatively secure HLZ. So we had to make sure we at least fought them back enough to the bad guys back enough to where we could secure an HLZ to get the bodies out. That night, I mean, the medic told me not to sleep because I was pretty banged up with a head injury. I ended up taking a go pill and staying up all night, talking to airplanes, feeling just nauseous, probably because of a concussion, mostly probably because I just lost my teammates. The next morning, we were getting reinforced. So the headquarters element was grabbing another team, and they were coming up to help reinforce us to finish clearing the valley out. An Army JTAC showed up, really squared away guy. I kind of got him switched on to the battle plan. I stayed up all night planning and coordinating the fires for the next day. And then we really took it to him. I had probably because we took such a beating that day that I don't know, the command. I mean, we had we killed a lot of bad guys with some air support the next day. We were able to pretty much keep a wall of fire in front of us with A-10s and Apaches and mortars as we were able to clear through to our final objective. And then after that final objective was secured, myself and Tony, he passed away later on that trip. We we needed to get medevac. He had a bullet in his leg, and I was banged up and had shrapnel, and we ended up driving all the way back to the fire base with some local Afghan partners and coordinated our medevac back to Tarin Cow. And also there was going to be a memorial service that evening for our guys. So the first thing I did, right when I went back to that base, I hadn't slept in 2 days. I had a bag of the body armor. We had bags of body armor and all the sensitive items for Mark and Calvin. I went into Mark's room and I just raided it with anything because I knew I was going to see our commander there, and I just raided it, like anything I could think of that you would possibly want. Hats, patches.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember everything I gave you because my injuries subsequently after that day, like I have a little bit of amnesia from it, but I remember finding the flag in his body armor with the bullet still in it. I needed to give you guys something. I can't remember everything it was. I took everything out of his room that I think that maybe his family would think was important to bring with me.
Absolutely. It all was. Yeah, you got us a lot, and the flag came very quickly. Very
Good.
quickly. Quicker
Yes.
than everything else.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't find that until after I got back. We were just going through stuff.
Well, that was a doozy.
Yeah,
Man, so, well, I if there's something else, George, that's important, yeah, share it. And I know that you, just for sake of time, I know you got injured pretty severely just a few weeks later, or maybe a week or two
few
later,
days.
and you,
It was
okay, a few days later, you found yourself back in the States at Walter Reed.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened? What happened to you?
Well, the docs they pulled the nasty stuff, the nasty shrapnel on my arms and hands, and said I had a concussion. I asked if I could go back to the team. I just had a blood vengeance, man. I was out for blood. I wanted to get back. All I wanted to do was get back to the fight. And they said, all right, no, you can go. It's up to you. Just don't hit your head. And then I don't know all the details, man. It's so fuzzy. Essentially, I was in a Humvee on some pretty janky terrain, and the ground kind of went out from us. And I was in the very back of it on the machine gun, and it was a rollover. And that truck, I mean, we rolled down the hill, and it rolled over me a few times. And I woke up, I guess, a couple days later in Kandahar, not knowing what happened. And I had shattered my hip, broke a bunch of bones in my back, broke my shoulder, and just had a ridiculous traumatic brain injury. Just a very, I had severe memory loss for a long time. And I was on my way to Walter Reed, where I'd spent the next nearly 7 months trying to recover, facing the possible med board. And I was like, well, what do I got to do to stay in? What do I got to do to stay in? And I spent the next 2 years after that in intensive rehab. I'm incredibly grateful for my leadership and the Air Force for allowing me that opportunity instead of just medically retiring me and letting me get back to active duty, because this is what I love to do. It really is. But it took a lot. It wasn't just my body. My heart, my soul were broken. I had a chaplain tell me once that, like, a good warrior, the 3 pillars that make a warrior a good warrior are his mind, his body, and his soul. And at the time, I was like, all right, you're an Air Force chaplain. What do you know about being a warrior? And I found myself in a position where all 3 of those were broken pretty severely. I would have nightmares about losing Mark. I harbored a lot of guilt for a long time. The day I came and met your parents and your family the first time, once I saw the sign for Haleyville, I pulled over on the side of the road and cried for about an hour before I could even get myself together to come to your house. The first time I met you guys.
Yeah, that was about 7 months after Mark was killed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is something that it's tough to share, but I share it openly, especially with young service members. That deployment I was on, it was my 9th trip overseas. I'd seen a lot of blood and guts. I'd buried a lot of friends. And it's never easy. And I don't want people to think that it is. But nothing impacted me the way it did when Mark died. And I think the reason is because that was the first time a friend was no kidding my responsibility. And I thought I had PTSD from it, and I didn't. And I'm glad I went and sought help. I really am. I told my commander when I got out of Walter Reed that, like, I'm on the track physically to getting better, but I need to work through some demons. And they were really open to that. It didn't hamstring my career. And what it was I was dealing with a severe case of survivor's guilt, which is a real thing. And the thing is, the Air Force taught me to do a lot of stuff, but it didn't tell me how to deal with something like that. And I probably spent a good 6 months with people that knew what they were doing to help me work through that. And I'm grateful for it because I think about Mark every day. That's the truth. I'll probably think of him every day till the day I die. But in the beginning stages of that grieving process, the thought of Mark was something that would just collapse me and put me into a very dark place. And being able to work through that survivor's guilt is the reason why I'm on active duty today. Because when I was able to turn the memory of my time with Mark and our service together into something that inspires me. And yes, I am sad. On the anniversary, it's a bad day for me. But for the most part, whenever I think about Mark and people who knew Mark, who will attest to this, and who are blessed to know Mark much longer than I ever did, he was one of the most positive forces in life. And I feel like if I stay driven to be a good person, do good things, never give up, that I'm honoring him. So the reason why I'm probably still here today, and the reason why I'm probably still going to be able to finish out my career, is because Mark is my ghost, but he is a ghost that drives me in the most positive way ever. And I want to share that because there are a lot of vets out there. There's a lot of guys who've seen heartache, and it could be on the battlefield. It could be at home. People lose loved ones all the time. And, to try and put things in perspective, to live to honor their memory is much different than trying to always think about what you couldn't control. And that was easier said than done. I can tell you that. It takes work, but I'm very grateful and blessed that I was able to get through that and to share that. Like, Mark, he is the most important person to me today, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're a fighter. You were before these injuries and before Mark's death, and you are, have been since. And you've been a blessing to our family and to this great nation, and to the young men that you serve, that you oversee in the Air Force, and who you've trained and taught and prepared to go to war. I mean, they're blessed to have learned from you. I can't really say any more than really what you said, George. We've only really scratched the surface, and I know we could talk about the trials on your with your family life, and I know you got divorced, but fortunately you're happily married now, and I don't know. It's just, I really appreciate you being on the show. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to say?
No, just thanks for giving me the opportunity to share that, and hopefully it helps somebody. I know that's what Mark would want. I'm pretty open when I talk to guys about some of those things. It's hard to be a strong person, to be a fighter, and to find yourself where you are maybe out of control and you need help, and it's okay to ask for it. And you'll actually I think you end up being a stronger person with just a much broader perspective once you get through it. And like I said, Mark's my hero, and he always will be. And I honestly feel that every good thing I have in life to this day is because he pushes. I feel him pushing me. He's who I think about when I feel I can't do something. So.
Well, thanks for sharing it and for being open, and it's been an honor to have you on here. And hang on for a minute, George, while I wrap it up. But for those listeners, if you've listened here to the end, then you must have enjoyed it, and I'm glad you did. I hope you did. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher and rate the podcast and share it. It's been great hearing from George today, and not only about his career, but how he went through some, some trials and physical injuries and emotional injuries, and it was kind of cool to hear about the last 2 days that he was with Mark before he was killed. So, till next time.